Welcome to today's Automotive Fleet webinar, 3 Solutions for Staying Ahead of Safety, Maintenance, and Compliance, presented by Fleetio and Verizon Connect. I'm Martin Ramju, Managing Editor at Automotive Fleet, and I'll be your moderator for today's event. We encourage you to ask questions during the webinar. We will try to address them all during the Q&A session, but if we don't get to yours, you will be contacted by email with a response after the event. We have a lot of good ground to cover today, and I am joined by 2 thought leaders who will share their expertise. Please welcome Stefano Doneri and Sean O'Brien to the webinar. And we'll have the 2 of you tell us a little bit about yourselves. Let's start with you, Stefano.
Thanks, Martin. First off, thanks to everybody for joining today. I'm excited to represent Fleetio, but also present alongside 2 fleet industry leaders in Verizon and Bobbitt. As Martin mentioned, my name is Stefano Doneri, and I'm a fleet ecosystem strategist at Fleetio. Fleetio is a modern fleet management and maintenance management platform that helps businesses track the entire life cycle of their assets, manage the entire maintenance life cycle for their teams, whether they manage service in-house or exclusively with third-party providers. And we provide an entire reporting platform to make decisions around planning and strategy a lot easier for your team. And to simplify what a fleet ecosystem strategist does, you could think of me as the upfitter of Fleetio and trying to make Fleetio stronger as it relates to all things data integrations and software integration. So happy to be here.
All right, Sean.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. Good to be with you, Stefano. And I want to thank Bobbitt Business Media for hosting our webinar today. I'm Sean O'Brien, Verizon Connect's relatively new safety consultant. So this is a brand new position for me in support of our mission at Verizon Connect. And for 25 years, I've been leading process improvement along with safety and health organizations for large organizations with sizable fleets, both in commercial transportation as well as more recently the consumer services industry. And you might imagine during that time, I've been able to gain a lot of experience around the deployment of technology, both telematics as well as video camera technology in the truck. So I think where I best fit is really on your side, the customer side. I've been in your shoes and I understand the perspective when we go in and evaluate our investment on technology. So happy to be here and looking forward to our discussion today. Martin?
All right, great to have you. Just a note to our audience, we have a bit of a bonus going on throughout the webinar today. We're going to have 5 polling questions that will be asked throughout. We certainly encourage you to respond, and we will show you the results live. The first question we're going to start off with on slide 3 is, what is your top priority when investing in fleet safety and maintenance? And there are 4 answers there, so we will get that out to you now. So as we await some of the results, Sean and Stefano, why don't we get into the business case for safety and maintenance investments?
Yeah, happy to kick things off. So I think personally, whenever I'm trying to get buy-in for projects, whether that's professionally with my boss or maybe at home with my wife, I think it's really important to get into the right mindset so that you can pitch your case really confidently. And I think for maintenance teams in particular, you have to have a mind shift change on how we frame maintenance internally. So it shouldn't just be a shop function. It shouldn't just be a line item on your budget. It's really your organization's insurance policy against risk and downtime and unplanned spend. And so in a recent survey that we did, 72% of fleet managers that were surveyed reported using some fleet maintenance software. And that really tells us a couple of things. 1, the industry's investment in technology is shifting. And 2, the ROI is there, or people really wouldn't be making these changes. So I realize it's easier said than done during the webinar. And when budgets are tight, selling PM can be pretty tough, especially when leadership might only see some of the cost above the surface, labor, parts, supplies, overhead. But knowing that the real costs are hidden below is ultimately what we want to help uncover. So a resource that I often recommend to prospective customers or just fleets that are looking to scale their PM programs is Joel Levitt's Complete Guide to Preventative and Predictive Maintenance. And in it, he makes a really powerful point that even an average PM program can reduce breakdown-related costs by up to 70%. I'll send you the book if you want a copy. It's on page 38. That's a big stat, but I think he makes it really easy to give us some back-of-the-napkin math. So if you take your annual breakdown cost and you multiply that by 70%, the answer that you get is the potential savings that you could unlock. And that's more than implementing a preventative maintenance system. So I think the big thing is if you do want to make the case for investment, don't just talk about how you're fixing things faster, really try and relate that to how smarter maintenance protects your people. It's improving the longevity of your assets, and it's cutting out a lot of the unproductive hours and overtime that your team might be spending. So you're not just spending more, but you're really stopping the leaks that you can actually plug up.
So before we get to Sean, wanted to just take a look at the results from this first question. 65% of respondents have labeled driver safety as their top priority, and only 17% mentioned cost reduction and compliance regulations, and I don't see any for vehicle uptime. So what's kind of the two of you, what's your instant analysis on this?
Well, I'll tell you what, Stefano, if I can take sort of the first response here, I'm a bit biased as a safety professional, so it's good to see that is, we'll say percentage-wise, a high priority coming in from our audience. You know, it reminds me of, I've always recalled what one of my presidents of operations used to say when I was in logistics and transportation. And they said safety, service, and cost. And it was a simple sequence of words, sort of a domino effect. But it was a strong reminder for his operations and his drivers that customer service quality, cost reduction, that is all a function of the decisions we make when it comes to safety. So I think that fits very, very well. So not only are we looking at compliance from a vehicle and driver fitness perspective, but do I really as a driver understand the expectations that have been set for me when it comes to defensive driving?
And I think if for the folks that submitted cost reduction, I think it's okay to say that a lot of these are connected or related. So if you are spending more strategically or you're performing PM versus unplanned or breakdown or reactive spend, you're probably improving driver safety in at the same time. So I think it's really about building a narrative around what's most important to your organization. And obviously your frontline staff, the ones that are getting into your vehicles and equipment every single day, serving your customers is how you run your business. So I think maintenance and safety go hand in hand.
All right, on slide 5, we get into more of the topic of rising costs, and that being a fleet challenge. And although only 17% mention costs as their primary reason, give us some insights as to how costs can be better managed and what seem to be the primary drivers of higher costs.
Stefano, do you want to maybe start with that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think similarly to maybe building off of the breakdown percentage, like I had mentioned before, I think it's really that strategic mind shift or the positioning shift around where your dollars are being spent. Clearly, technology is important. I know in the technology trend report that you had, I think you had there it is on the right side of the slides. But if you see that just like 47%, 53%, 47%, these investments in technology are clearly paying off. And that's what your leadership team wants to hear, is that these investments aren't just going to sit on the shelf. They're not just going to be an expensive paperweight, but they're going to help you offset a lot of the rising costs that our industry is facing, whether that's in increased labor rates, if that's increased parts rate, obviously on the acquisition side of things. So, thinking about it from a fleet management and maintenance perspective, but I think that ties into safety where you have clear records, you have documented records that's going to offset, DOT violations or potential audits that you might have by having clean records. So maintenance is safe business and that is good business. So Sean, maybe take it from there.
Yeah, and I just want to maybe overlap, Stefano, with some of the comments you made when you went through your business case. I think you made it really simple to understand. It was good perspective. And for me, from purely my experience alone, when we look at building a safety management system, the advantage is a proactive maintenance program as well. And so it's reliability, it's your building trust, your reputation with a strong proactive maintenance program for being dependable, at least in the customer's eyes, continues to grow. And so you can understand that from a business perspective, how that then allows you to command more premium pricing. It gives you a better opportunity to build even more market share. And if I could, Martin, I wanted to share just a quick, not case study, but some feedback from one of our customers that has just piloted a driver vehicle inspection report. And it was a manager in the South region for a company that supports the healthcare industry. And I'm just going to sort of verbatim read to the audience what he described regarding his experience with the DVIR. He said the simplicity of the form. Now, this customer is in Little Rock, Arkansas, and only has 7 drivers using DVIR in terms of the pilot experience at this point. But he said the simplicity of the form, the easiness of the app, probably cuts about 30 to 45 minutes out per day. It's literally the easiest thing to use that I've seen. And that would put us on, and this is really the takeaway for me, that would put us on pace to save over 100 hours a year. That's 7 drivers. And so for me, I got to keep the math simple, Stefano. So if it was small, then maybe a medium-sized fleet, 70 drivers. Now you're at 1,000 hours, 700 drivers, a more enterprise-wide fleet. Now you're at 10,000 hours of administrative, cost-effective savings just related to the use of a digital DVIR. And going back, Stefano, to your business case, right, we can get into the value of that integration, which expands that benefit even further. I think when we talk about, Martin, if I could, just safe business is good business, it's common sense. Sometimes you need to start a lot of these conversations outside the numbers is usually what I say, because most of us know safety, it's just the right thing to do. And you can sort of lean back on that example that I've sort of kept back of mind in my relationship, my experience with operational leaders of the past. At Verizon Connect, beyond just the DVIR, we're here to help support customers, again, effectively build a safety management system. And for the most part, that is quite often separate from technology and how we engage and how we effectively use technology to connect with people. And so we talk a lot about our mission, helping customers drive to a safer tomorrow. And that really means taking a very continuous approach and really placing focus less on all the widgets, the bells and whistles of the user interface, and more on process, more on partnership. And that's really the case here today with our trusted integration with Fleetio and how we really look to work together to I usually say, accelerate the outcomes that we desire when we think about safety, along with maintenance with regard to the customer experience. So there's a tremendous amount there. Quantitatively, then, if you kind of just look at some of the numbers that are being shown here on the screen, Martin, I think this is what Bob at Business Media has helped Verizon Connect pull together our fleet technology trends report for, I think, 5 years now running.
At least that.
And it's been a very consistent trend. So what we're seeing, and I guess no surprise, right? Increasing costs are always the top fleet challenge each and every year. But the good news is that with GPS, with telematics, with the ability to track, you're reducing those costs with very quick ROI. And we're seeing an average savings here on the screen of 16% in both maintenance and repair, along with fuel, volume of fuel, fuel MPG. Fleets are also using telematics, especially to really get in with video to prioritize collision prevention. And that's a game changer. And for those who are consistently using video to engage but coach their drivers, this is really leading to the improved driving behavior that we often see from those investments. We're seeing reductions in average speed, Martin. We're seeing better following distance. And ultimately, it's the third piece of the business case. You're seeing less distraction behind the wheel, especially when we're making investments on driver-facing cameras. So this expands well beyond when we think about business case and the technology at your disposal, DVIR, and just the maintenance piece of it. But certainly our focus today is going to be looking at the value proposition of how we integrate both DVIR and that vehicle maintenance piece.
Sean, I wanted to just revert to kind of a basic 101 question here, especially for those fleet managers who are still exploring telematics. Tell us real quick the difference between the GPS tracking, the asset tracking, and the in-cab video, and how they all work together towards ROI and better safety.
Yeah, GPS tracking is sort of your dots on a map. And certainly as a starting point, it's going to provide visibility, which is value. I think quite often when you get into asset tracking, you're looking at powered and non-powered assets. So you can really drive. I think Stefano is probably getting into, he'll get into a lot more around asset utilization and asset uptime. Those are all important to have visibility around. I think telematics alone can provide the behavioral insights, and it gets you the ability to understand driving behavior, both in terms of speed, which is 1/3 of all fatal collisions, as well as that space management principle when we begin to see trends in harsh driving, specifically excessive braking. The video component, though, is what adds the context. This is going to give you the surrounding driver environment and really allow you to drill in and visualize, observe the behavior behind the wheel when it comes to driver inattention. And that's the biggest piece of the puzzle, combined with speed and space management, Martin. That's where we're seeing acceleration in the return on investment when we're coaching, engaged, and connecting with our employees to champion those habits, those behaviors.
Mm-hmm. I keep hearing a lot about how speed and distracted driving are kind of interchangeably the leading causes of safety violations. Which of those two is proving to be more of a problem for fleet managers?
Well, I guess it depends on what angle you look at and what report you're looking at, because I think in CSA for the longest time for commercial fleets, compliance, safety, accountability, sort of we'll call it a motor carrier's health evaluation. It was always speeding, unsafe driving basic, but the twist was there was a lot of 1 to 5 mile per hour speeding offenses. And a lot of those offenses, for those who are listening, were always off highway. And that's where roadside inspectors were sort of shining in their own moment, because we had to quickly adapt as drivers from highway speed to local speed for that final mile delivery. And you had a lot of, especially in commercial zones, you had a lot of activity, a lot of exposure right there for roadside. You also had a lot of speed limit changes going from high to low in those more rural areas, off highway areas as well. So that's sort of the mechanics behind, depending on what you're looking at, speed always.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I think we want to move on to collisions, which is something we always want to prevent in a fleet operation. And there are two terms here which are kind of broad, and I know you can get them more specific, but long-term risk modeling and strategic planning. Tell us a little bit about how those unfold with the technologies behind them and the results they can produce for the fleet managers.
Yeah, Sean, if you want, I can kick things off here and we can kind of play off one another. But I think this is really where you start shifting from being reactive to being more proactive. And it's not just in your process, but it's really, once again, talking about that mindset shift. And as Martin mentioned, I think a big word in risk modeling, it can sound pretty technical, but it's really just looking at trends, like where are you seeing repeat failures? What's costing us more year over year? And ultimately trying to find those blind spots. And the strategic planning side is saying, let's do something about it before it gets worse. And that's ultimately what leadership wants to hear, is that you're thinking about, basically how can you solve for challenges today while being intentional about what's most important for the business long term. And I think the good thing is that, one, you might already have a lot of this data that you need, a lot of the trend data that you need from inspection data, from service logs, from maybe telematics, but it might be scattered across a few different platforms. And to Sean's point, that's really the strength of integration, is that not only does it automate a data feed, but it consolidates a lot of the data that you need to make decisions around, a lot of those trend reportings that we'll be talking about. And if you don't have that, it's really hard to be proactive, and your team will more than likely continue to stay in firefighting mode. And so you need to bring this data together. And, for context, one fleet that we were working with in the utility space, just by one, integrating their, let's say telematics and fleet management software, as well as consolidating all the data that they needed around fuel and maintenance spend and other expenditures, they were able to gain the ability to run reports at 1/10 the speed, allowing them to free up more time to focus on what's maybe going on in the road with their drivers, or maybe what's going on issues inside the shop. And so it doesn't have to be a perfect model. You just have to start by identifying certain patterns and starting to share those insights with leadership. And so if you were able to walk into a board meeting and say, hey, look, here's a $10,000 problem that we can solve next quarter, more than likely somebody's going to start listening, and they're going to take you out after the meeting and say, tell me a little bit more about that. So that's what it's all about. Let's identify risks. Let's come up with some plans to address those. You don't have to tackle everything all at once, as much as we might always be in that mindset, but you can start small and you can start seeing some major impact in the meantime.
Yeah, and I guess strategically speaking, again, purely from a safety perspective, my first goal is always to prevent the collision. So, but when something does happen, and we're talking about strategic planning, understanding the why, taking the time to understand that why and how we reduce risk to all of our on-road exposures, that becomes really important. How do we leverage our incident findings and the work done through investigation to drive corrective and preventative action? How do we share or leverage best practices throughout your organization to support the strategic planning session? Are we tying safety into budgeting decisions at a profit and loss level? How are we using those inputs to really drive both short-term as well as long-term goal setting? All of that is critical in terms of not just risk modeling, but also setting the stage with leadership and the C-suite when we talk about what goes into strategy. And there's a lot of work that goes into it, and certainly technology, and to the points that Stefano made, that kind of all helps bring everything together. The one thing, if I could add, Martin, that I see too many times, and it's pretty basic and it's understanding, but companies are making investments in technology. I think the intentions are always good. The ROI model may be even strong and maybe strong enough, but I think for the most part, a lot of the times it can be misleading too if we're not careful. So you really want to spend, when we think about ROI, the extra time upfront, making sure you have initial costs budgeted for things like change management, ensuring you have the dedicated resources and the buy-in from your operations, from your frontline, I call them frontline champions. Make sure that stuff is in order first so that you can support technology beyond just the point of deployment, because that's where I see the breakdown. You have a deployment of technology, and very quickly, 6 months to 12 months, right, you're right back to where you were with just an investment in technology, and you're really not taking the opportunity to maximize that return, that investment. So I just wanted to point that out, because all too often you see how many different reviews and articles, Stefano, around this very message, where at the end of the day, it just comes to, do we have what we need to execute successfully?
Well, that kind of leads into our next poll question. How do you currently identify risks associated with your fleet operations? Is it through regular inspections, telematics data, driver feedback, or you don't actively identify risks? And while we're waiting for these results to come in, one question that occurred to me in our previous discussion, particularly when it comes to strategic planning for a fleet, one of the topics of concern that we hear at conferences from fleet managers is fleet cycling and remarketing vehicles, especially when there are macroeconomic influences going on like tariffs and inflation and supply chain issues. How can this technology help be predictive when it comes to that type of strategic planning, especially when dealing with unusual circumstances?
Yeah, I mean, I can chime in first and say, kind of back to that risk modeling piece, when you're bringing all the information together, it allows you to be more intentional about, let's just say core fundamental fleet management objectives, which is you purchase assets, whether you purchase them to own, whether you purchase them and lease them, and maybe you're splitting maintenance responsibilities between your dealer and your in-house team. The reality is that asset has a clock that starts on it, and you want to make sure that you're investing in it as strategically as possible. We were talking about the most recent benchmarking report that we did, but last year, a data point that we saw was, the optimal time to replace, or at least, let's figure out what to do with this asset, is about the 5-year mark. But most fleets are starting to see like a $10,000 increase per asset that they acquire. So a lot more fleets are starting to say, maybe we don't, purchase to lease, maybe we're just purchasing to own, and we're just going to run this thing into the ground and make the most use out of it. But the reality is, you're in the business to serve customers. You use vehicles and equipment to serve them. It's a necessary part of your operation. But I think the more data that you have at your disposal to say, look, do we have breakdown trends with a specific make and model? If you have that organized in one space, you might be able to maybe think about a different model and maybe preserve some of your costs that way. Even certain things like integrating telematics data like DTCs or engine fault codes, especially having that data accessible remotely, also allows you to maybe get ahead of potential catastrophic issues or engine failures that are going to have to force you to potentially even rebuild an engine outright. So I think bringing all of this data together is going to be really helpful in helping you maximize that depreciation period and ultimately the time it takes for you to own or to resell, depending on your situation.
Okay, well, the results now are in. The survey for this question is closed. Looks like we have more of a split on these results about identifying risks associated with fleet operations. Regular inspections and telematics is tied at 37%, and driver feedback is at almost 26%. What do you make of this? What is this telling you? Are there any gaps, any FYIs that you need to let fleet operations know about?
I think that this shows that teams, if it's pretty evenly split, that we're really only scratching the surface, or you're using a mix of tools to identify risk. And the reality is some fleets are relying solely on driver feedback or maybe whiteboards in the office or phone calls. And then others might have a more advanced fleet stack with telematics or an integrated DVIR process where you're actually able to get that defect immediately and start managing your maintenance life cycle. But I think the goal ultimately is to start documenting, start planning, start seeing what are the trends, and then starting to take action on it depending on the severity or depending on what's going to help your frontline teams most and ultimately improve uptime for your team and your assets.
Yeah, and I sort of look at this, Stefano, more from a driver feedback perspective when I think about the value of a behavioral-based safety program. That is so important in changing culture. Now, we talked about video specifically. That's sort of bringing BBS, behavioral-based safety, into the vehicle with you. And there's a lot of customers probably on our call today that do that very well. But empowering your employees to be a part of the solution is sort of 101. You had asked that question earlier, Martin, about how you build safety culture. And it's really getting in with the front line, getting them involved in understanding work as we plan it, and then work as it's actually done. When we think about those, we call them sticky moments, stuff that can kill you type moments, where we take shortcuts and we look to place sometimes sales over safety in the decisions that we make. So it was great to see a number of these different responses, but that's the one that hit on me the most.
All right. So when it comes to integrating digital driver vehicle inspection reports and planned maintenance to stay compliant, what are some of the key steps here and ways that technology can help with that?
Yeah, I think maybe I can start with this, Stefano, and then you can kind of help me finish any thoughts that I may miss. But I want to talk about maybe the trigger point here, the starting point, when we think about our integration with Fleetio. And it was just last year that Verizon Connect launched a new customizable digital vehicle inspection report solution. And this is going to allow customers to quickly replace paper-based compliance. That's usually step one. It doesn't change everything for you, but certainly it's going to quickly improve vehicle health visibility, especially when you think about this at scale for decentralized operations. And so you can, if you sort of frame back to the customer feedback that I shared, you can quickly see how this begins to give an assist or the assist it provides customers, not just maintaining the safe operation of vehicles, but also how it's driving that resource and that cost related efficiency, a theme that will just continue to come up in this conversation. And that's exactly where our partnership with Fleetio, again, begins to accelerate. We call it this time to value for customers. And because with DVIR, we're not just literally checking boxes on a digital form. I used to always say with DVIR, it was a little bit ironic. It's a case, it's really, if you think about it, it's in place to prevent a vehicle malfunction or breakdown. But yet for many customers, it's also where the business process begins to break down as well. We just have a DVIR solution, whether it's paper-based or it's digital, but we don't really have the ability to integrate. So moving from paper to a digital solution, certainly a good first step. But the biggest opportunity is, how do I then discover, not just document defects, but how do I create the visibility to streamline the scheduling and the repair of those very vehicle issues? And I think, Stefano, you could probably talk to that in a little bit more detail, but I just wanted to add one more key point to this. Again, away from the technology, it's also about culture. So, for example, will my management team support prioritizing safety over service when issues do arise? They do get documented. When repairs are needed, when it's the end of the month, it's the end of the quarter, it's the end of the year, and we're trying to make our numbers. I know it turns quickly into a conversation of integrity, but who's going to facilitate those difficult but necessary questions with customers regarding delays? Because organizationally, we understand the value of safety, and that always comes first. So, Stefano, what do you think about some of those comments and maybe just some of your inputs around this?
Yeah, I think fundamentally an integration, the best integrations they're going to automate a lot of the redundant tasks that you have to deal with, whether that's through paper processes. They're also going to trigger and automate certain workflows. And in the maintenance perspective, we can use something like a defect that's reported or tracked in Verizon. That defect could be automatically sent into Fleetio, and that trigger now helps you. It's a data point that now helps you plan and handle your service, whether you're scheduling techs time, whether you're allocating parts, or you're having to coordinate service with a third-party shop. It's giving you the information a lot faster, but really it's only one data point alongside a whole lot of other data points that you have to make decisions around. We know that not only are you making maintenance decisions, but you're also responsible for, one, keeping assets on the road, but you're having to manage the actual inventory that you have. So what assets are assigned? What are their maintenance schedules coming up? What jobs do we have coming up that we need to make sure that we can have equipment and assets ready for? And I think the best thing about integrating a DVIR directly with your maintenance solution is that it allows you to plan way more proactively, and it links directly to the maintenance workflow. And for Fleetio in particular, our commitment is to automate that process as much as possible. So those triggers that come through, whether that's from an inspection, whether that's a recall from your OEM, whether that's a fault code from the engine, that's a PM reminder, we're giving you all of that information in one place so that you can handle it. And then once that's resolved, you now have all of that data to report against, so you could see what your operating expenses are for your assets across different divisions and groups. But you can also start monitoring the trends around your service. How much are we spending on PM versus unplanned repairs? Are there specific trends specifically on the types of defects that our drivers and frontline teams are communicating that we need to get ahead of? And I think that's the strength of the integration is empowering you with all the information that you need to be successful and ultimately make your team as productive as possible. We hear a lot of the time that, especially in today's day and age when you might be dealing with some labor challenges in the shop, you're now able to really plan effectively and make sure that you're not overworking the staff and you're using them and their expertise the right way. So I think there's just that digitization is somewhat of just a norm these days, and it's making fleets a lot stronger and helping them move through the process a lot more strategically.
So I'd like to move on to our next poll question here. I'm going to get into the whole topic of compliance. How confident are you in your organization's compliance with regulatory standards? Very, somewhat, or not confident or unsure? And as we await the results, give us a sense of the compliance burden on fleets and how that has varied and what fleets are facing, especially with added technologies, varying regulations from state to state. What are you seeing on that front?
I think just very contextually here, compliance, when I think about compliance and compare it to the job of a safety professional, certainly they're interwoven, but they are mutually exclusive from one another. Safety certainly is all about behavior and driving prevention. Where when we think about business process today, there's a minimum bar that's automatically set within any process. When we're evaluating regulations, you have to do it. And I think so many organizations today are fit very well to be more of a compliance-driven type company because it's very natural that you have something to do in terms of responding to those regulations. So I think for the most part, the burden, if I can use an example, it's always being reevaluated. It's going to be there. It's sort of your price of admission when you think about what it is that we have to support each and every day when it comes to things like vehicle regulatory compliance. But I mean, ultimately, I think it goes well beyond that particular position for me in terms of how we use compliance maybe as a starting point. And then we use that to really build into how we want to expand culture around safety and focus really on the behavior and less on just, hey, we're meeting a regulation. And I think the FMCSA has done a pretty good job for any relevant fleet that's listening to the feedback from the industry as of recently. And this has been ongoing since 2010 when it was first introduced, right, to the regulatory community with CSA and their efforts to now just go back through and reprioritize, as they would say, to provide more clarity and fairness and accuracy into how they evaluate carriers within certain peer groups. So I think there's a lot there in terms of what's happening more recently with organizational compliance. Mm-hmm.
Now, looking at these results, I don't know if we should be disturbed. 26% say very confident, almost half say somewhat confident. When it comes to dealing with compliance, how much of the problem and the solution lies with culture versus technology? And how can those two inform each other to instill more confidence in compliance?
I mean, I know Sean probably has a book's worth of customer feedback on even things like in-cab cameras, and we hear it all the time, like, hey, are you going to be watching me? It's for your safety. It's for, overcoming potential legal issues. It's saving drivers. And I think like this, I see this more as like there's more than over 70% that are pretty confident, all things considered, which shows that one, maybe they're investing in technology that's helping to make their internal process a lot easier, or even joining a webinar like the one that we're hosting is they're thinking about the right things and hoping to bring information back to their organization so that they can improve that. But Sean, I mean, I'll kick it to you because I know you probably have some stories on just the payoff for what technology can have in this arena.
Well, I think the payoff is it comes when we have a connecting point with our employees. And so I know it sounds very high level, but we talk a lot about being leadership born and employee led, organizationally speaking, when we look at the value of safety. And so it all comes back to all of these discussions come back to trust with our leadership and with one another, really building that interdependency that we need. I have your back, you have my back when we think about how we look to build culture, safety culture, and really operationalize it with the technology that we've been talking about. All too often, though, we have the technology, but we're resistant, we're impeded, there's barriers to consistently make those human touch points. And that's the most important piece when we think about the return on investment. If you're not doing anything with the intelligence that you're gathering, the insights that you're collecting, and you're not reinforcing and coaching and resetting that expectation aligned with a mission, right? You carry very little value long-term with regard to anything that you will drive performance related. That really begins to speak and build the foundation that really rolls into these strategic planning type discussions. When we think about how do you get leadership involved, it really starts with them. And if there's one area, I think there's one opportunity in the marketplace from my area, Stefano, specifically, is we need to do more in how we train, how we support, how we develop the supervisor level of an organization. Because a lot of the times we're moving so fast, we're doing a lot more with a lot less. And for all the right reasons, right? We have shining stars that were technicians at one point that now are managers. But it's the first time they've been managers. And we're not doing enough to develop them as a manager, as a leader, because they're not used to working or overseeing a team. And you can see how that has such a dramatic effect, right? And everyone has sort of pockets of this when we think about recruitment, retention, and overall performance appraisal within their organization. But it has such a dramatic effect when we think about the value that we do or do not get from technology and how leadership sort of helps with that.
Yeah, and I think I meant to say this earlier, but thanks, Sean, for reminding me. But I think you had mentioned it, whether it's FMCSA, I think over half of the violations that are maintenance related. That's brakes, it's tires, that's lights, which if you're doing routine checks in your inspections and you're tracking your PMs and doing those inspections in-house, those are all pretty avoidable fines. And we know that some of those fines can run up into the tens of thousands. And when you also think about record compliance, showing completed maintenance records alongside completed inspections, those fines can also get up into the tens of thousands per asset. And so, I think a lot of the compliance, like Sean mentioned, is building some consistent process and understanding around this is why we do it. This is how it benefits the organization. This is how it benefits you. And then I think if you're able to tell your leadership team and executives that, these tools combined make us audit ready, and you have all of that documentation available for you on your phone or a tablet, whether you're on the road, miles away from your headquarters, or you have a surprise visit, you have all of that documentation right there, and you can make sure that you can cover all the bases you need to keep your organization safe.
So I'm sorry to cut you off there, Sean, but in the interest of time here, we have two more polling questions in our next two slides to get to that can kind of help answer some of these issues. The next polling question is, do you struggle getting leadership buy-in for technology? Yes, no, or sometimes. I think people can answer that very, very quickly. And that kind of will lead into the next question about what resources would help your cause. And as soon as we have enough time for this first one, we will throw out that second question right away, and then you can talk about both of them. But what is kind of the key challenge for fleet managers and staff to get technology accepted, or to get it to become a mainstay of the fleet culture?
I mean, I can kick things off, Sean, but I think when you think about leadership, they're not just busy, but they have a lot on their mind, and they might not always be looking at just maintenance. They're looking at risk, they're looking at efficiency, they're looking at their operating ratios, they're trying to shift from maybe the red to the black or the green. And so when you connect your maintenance, or you're able to kind of say, look, this is how this technology is not only going to benefit and build a stronger maintenance culture, but it's also going to connect directly to the goals or initiatives that we have, which is, here's how this technology might expand into that new market that we're going in, or here's how this technology can help us report on maybe low performing or underutilized assets that we could sell or shift around to make room for new assets to support some of the new jobs that we have planned. But I think it's really making sure that you're shifting that conversation into the language that makes sense for them. And it doesn't have to be a perfect presentation. It just really does need to show how maintenance and safety and technology are going to produce the outcomes that your execs really care about. And I also think that speaks to the intention that you have as a professional at your organization that clearly cares about the success, your own success, your team's success, your organization's success. I think that's really going to open up some ears and see not only that you are a leader within your organization, but that you're providing and bringing solutions to the forefront that can really help, build consistency and keep your organization at the forefront for many years to come.
So the results show an even 30% for yes, 40% no, 30% for sometimes. Why don't we send out the next question on resources and let the audience answer that? And Sean, we can now get to your point as they're answering that next question.
Yeah, I think part of our responsibility is our own leader is its influence. These aren't the C-suite. Our executive leaders aren't people who live in an ivory tower and in a place that's not accessible, right? So I think don't underestimate the time that it does take to perform discovery and build the business case. It doesn't happen as quick as you want it to happen. But take the time to influence by building relationships and getting to know your leaders a little bit better on a personal level. Understand their perspective and how it relates to both top line and bottom line goal setting. That's going to help sort of influence the story you tell and allow you to say things in certain ways that impact what they feel are most important. So see it through their eyes, but more importantly than that, whatever you do, keep it very, very simple. I've always said that simple is sustainable. And so when we were rolling out telematics at one point, I had a genius of a director of fleets of fleet at the time. And he was a part of the presentation we had with leadership. And we had one goal, and that was to take all of this telematics data. And Stefano, I remember you always saying to me, thousands and thousands, right, of DTS troubleshooting codes you could look at, you could analyze. But our goal, our strategy was, let's just focus on 2 diagnostic codes. And that's exactly what we did in explaining what we wanted to do with telematics and what we wanted to do in terms of using that information to improve our maintenance program. And so we looked at 2 codes, engine check light on, and we looked at internal engine temperature. 2 measures that would quickly help us, Martin, identify behavior. And it really gave leadership a very easy way to look at things, because ultimately what they care about the most is not just the bottom line, top line numbers, but how is this going to impact my operations on a day-to-day basis? So you got to keep it easy.
So the next question, the follow-on here, shows somewhat of a splintered distribution as to what resources would help the cause of advocating for more technology. What do you make of this? Because I know you were just saying it's a matter of keeping it simple.
I would say for the folks that submitted consultation, Sean and I will contact you after the webinar and we'll set up some time to meet with your leadership team. But yeah, I mean, I think that this highlights that, especially with case studies and key talking points, you kind of need cold hard facts. Your leadership team, as much as they have the flexibility, maybe being with the front lines, building those relationships, they want to hear exactly how this is going to help specific to their business and their operations, as Martin mentioned. So I think certain things like case studies are putting the use case in perspective. They could see their operation in a similar fleet that has had results around the goals that you're hoping to tackle. And I think in the key talking points, it's also just helping to guide and steer those conversations, especially if you don't have a whole lot of time. And I think one thing is, especially on the maintenance side of things, you're the expert, you know your assets, you know your team, you know how they run, and it's sort of giving you a bit of guardrails on knowing your fleet and then putting that into the language that a leader might understand. And a lot of that's going to come from uptime. It's going to come from breakdown, unplanned spend, and shifting that into the reputation of the business, driver safety, and you want to know exactly how this is going to help you sell this to leadership. So I think this range makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and we're here to help. I think you've already said the key points, and whether it's a case study or it's something that Stefano and I need to work with you on directly from a consultative standpoint to get maybe a pilot set up. These are leadership. These are results-driven people. And I think ultimately when I mention a point of influence, this is the information you need to ultimately, if you think about it, make it feel like it's their decision. If you can get to that point with your leadership team where they're making a decision because they feel it's their own, that's a good place to be in.
So I'm going to ask the audience, if you have any questions, please start submitting them. And as they're doing that, if you can just, I know there's a lot more we could have talked about. What are some of the last takeaways, the big points that you want to carry home for the audience, real quick?
Yeah, Stefano, I can kick off the first one if you don't mind, because the one that sort of jumps out at me is we have to remember, regardless of your fleet or profile of fleet, DVIR is for everyone. So driver vehicle inspection reports are not just for commercial trucks or trucks under regulation. So you have every ability, right, to use DVIR to create cadence, to build culture, and really drive efficiency for your organization without having to even worry about compliance regulation. It's just a great cost-effective way to get started. That would be one point that I would want to recap, Stefano.
Yeah, I would say, I think if you're in this session, you, one, already believe that maintenance matters, and there's clearly opportunities to improve your day-to-day operations and start thinking more strategically or around planning and what are some things that you could do to make those changes and communicate the benefits of that around your operation. So I think on a tactical perspective, certain things like DVIRs, whether you're digitizing that, where you're starting to do that on paper, documenting it, start picking some low-hanging fruit, and start to communicate those trends. I mean, I just got out of a meeting with a coworker who was doing that. She does a weekly sort of audit on certain things, and I think that's really important, is just building consistency, starting to share your findings. But I think strategically, we talked a lot about integrations, but I think it's really important to uncover as many rocks as you can and figure out, are there other partners or are there vendors that you could work with to help it kind of accelerate the progress of this? I know Sean and I obviously work for technology, safety, and maintenance providers here. We integrate to make our fleet customers' lives easier, help them maintain maintenance compliance and safety compliance. But even for teams that manage a shop operation, you might be thinking about improving the relationship with your parts vendor. Maybe you're thinking about shifting all of your maintenance in-house. Maybe you don't have the budget right now to stock parts on hand. You still are thinking proactively around cost saving, and maybe working with a part vendor in your area to stock that for you could be strategic. So I think it's really understanding what resources do you have, and then knowing what cards you want to play and lean into. And ultimately, you're here, you're thinking about your business, you want to be successful, you want your teams to be successful, and that's really what your leadership team should be happy about. So that's what I would close with.
Okay. We got some just straightforward logistical questions from the audience. Will these slides be made available? Yes. Is this being recorded? Yes. And these other notes can certainly we can handle those after the presentation. But in terms of just some extra insight questions here, can you provide some examples of how all of this technology gives organizations a competitive advantage? I think that's one angle that's especially on the minds of fleets that have to that are private sector, that are commercial rental, that have to be out there from a competitive posture. How does this technology help?
Go ahead,
I'll just say, I think it's not just about the efficiencies that you gain, and obviously there are a lot of ways to think about technology and the functionality that it has, but it is really giving you more reliability. And so when a fleet runs smoother, you're showing up in fewer delays, you're increasing vehicle uptime, even though I think that's an important one. And you obviously have the better safety records, all of which is helping you win bids. It's helping you retain contracts with your existing customers. And it's also helping to attract talent, which we know is a major challenge in the industry today. So by having assets that are well maintained, you're building the reputation, customers want to work with you. You also want the next generation of your team to join your staff. I think all of that can come down from technology providing that competitive advantage.
Sean, you have anything to add on that one? No, I just like the point that Stefano had brought up. We surfaced this a little bit earlier in the discussion, and we highlighted that, you know, your reputation for dependability, as that grows, given everything that Stefano had said, this is what's leading to more, at least an opportunity in terms of how you price, in terms of how you set yourself apart from the competitors, because you have focus on what matters the most. You have intelligence and you have the ability to drive more reliability and more successful outcomes for your customers, and you begin to build more market share because of that. So I'm going to ask one other extra question here, and it's kind of a personal favorite of mine, since I have spent a lot of time in the car rental and remarketing side of fleet, but it's, how does a digital vehicle inspection work? Do drivers use an app? So walk us through that and what the benefits are of that. Yeah, I can handle certainly many different layers of this question, Martin. But yes, it is an app, to answer the question directly. And it's a customizable experience. So we can support both pre and post-trip inspection forms. And you can configure it to cover really all of your necessary inspection points, encompassing both, and this is important, tractor and trailer. You heard Stefano talk about the importance of really prioritizing what matters most. And so whether that's lights, tires, or brakes, you have every opportunity to really configure that form to your desire to support your needs with respect to your business process, but also with respect to what we see from enforcement during roadside inspection activity. And there are a core set of repairs and accessories, equipment accessories, that are always of main focus from a regulatory standpoint. And those are the top three, usually including steering, suspension, conspicuity tape, you know, all these easy things that, as we're a traveling billboard down the highway, are easy to pick off from an enforcement standpoint. Within the, Martin, within the app itself, as you walk through the process and how you configure the form, the driver experience allows them to take pictures of the vehicle defects. They can input driver notes, and you can actually have a confirmation as to whether or not the defect you documented makes the vehicle unsafe to operate. There is a step included in there as well that allows you to escalate that particular issue to a manager. And then if you kind of take a step back at a higher level, we have reports included as a part of this solution that generate sort of a summary level as well as a detailed inspection level of activity. We have a missing inspection report, which shows vehicles operating without a completed inspection. And we also have, and this is one of my favorite features, an insight alert, again, thinking more proactively, included to notify customers when vehicles are in motion without having completed a DVIR. So this is where, when it's safe to do so, very early on in your dispatch, in your run, you have every chance to get back in front of the driver when the vehicle's not in motion, maybe when they're at a customer site, to remind them of their responsibilities. All right. Well, unfortunately, we are out of time. I know this is a topic where we could probably add another half hour or so, but we certainly want to thank everyone for the participation and the questions that you've submitted. If you have any other questions, please submit them and we will get answers to you. Sean and Stefano, we appreciate your, Stefano, I'm sorry, we appreciate your expertise and helpful takeaways. Certainly the audience found them very useful. We want to again thank Verizon Connect and Fleetio for making today's presentation possible and further educating the fleet industry. This webinar will be available on demand on the Automotive Fleet website at automotive-fleet.com/webinars. So on behalf of the entire team here at Automotive Fleet and Bob at Business Media, I'm Martin Ramju. Thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you again soon for another Automotive Fleet webinar. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.